New Orleans is already underwater. Most people just do not know it yet. 65% of the city sits below sea level right now, today, not during a flood. On a dry Tuesday afternoon, the only thing keeping it from becoming the floor of the Gulf of Mexico is 120 pumps running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, powered by steam turbines installed when Woodrow Wilson was president. Since 1932, Louisiana has lost 2,006 square miles of coastline, an area larger than the state of Delaware, permanently gone, at a rate of 1 football field every 100 minutes. And the $15.6 billion floodwall system the federal government built after Hurricane Katrina to protect what remains? Scientists confirmed in 2025 that sections of it are sinking at 28 millimeters per year, 7 times faster than sea level is rising. The system built to save the city is becoming the next thing that fails. Here is the part nobody is talking about. In July 2025, the governor of Louisiana canceled the one engineering project that scientists unanimously agreed could actually reverse the land loss, after $619 million had already been spent on it. Not paused, canceled. And the window to replace it is closing faster than anyone in a position of power is willing to admit. What happens to 350,000 people, to $100 billion in energy infrastructure, to the port that moves 1/5 of America's exports, when the football field disappears every 100 minutes and nobody stops it? New Orleans was never supposed to last. The French founded it in 1718 on a sliver of high ground along a bend in the Mississippi River, a ribbon of solid land that engineers still call the natural levee, surrounded on all sides by swamp, bayou, and water table that sat inches below the surface. The city that would eventually produce jazz, Mardi Gras, and a culinary tradition unlike anything else in America was built on what geologists describe as some of the most geologically unstable ground in North America. The Mississippi River Delta beneath it is a structure made of compressed sediment, clay, peat, and silt stacked thousands of feet deep, all of it slowly, constantly compacting under its own weight. Without new sediment being deposited on top to replace what compresses below, the land sinks. For 7,000 years, the river solved that problem automatically. Every spring, the Mississippi flooded its banks and deposited 400 million metric tons of sediment across the surrounding wetlands. This was not a disaster. This was the engine that built Louisiana, a geological conveyor belt that constructed more than 9,650 square miles of coastal wetlands, a natural buffer that protected New Orleans from storms the way a forest absorbs sound. Each mile of wetland slows a hurricane's storm surge by roughly half a foot. At its peak, Louisiana's coast was so thick with marsh, swamp, and barrier islands that a hurricane had to fight through dozens of miles of natural resistance before it reached the city. Then came the levees. After the catastrophic Mississippi River flood of 1,927, which submerged 27,000 square miles, killed more than 500 people, and displaced 630,000, Congress passed the Flood Control Act of 1928, and the Army Corps of Engineers began building what would become the most extensive river levee system in the world. 1,000 miles of concrete and earthen walls confining the Mississippi to a narrow channel, preventing the floods that had always nourished the coast. The goal was flood control. The unintended consequence was geological slow-motion catastrophe. The levees worked exactly as designed. The river stopped overflowing. And when the river stopped overflowing, it stopped depositing sediment on the wetlands. The 400 million tons of material that once built Louisiana every year now travels confined in a concrete channel and dumps into the deep Gulf of Mexico, where it builds nothing. The sediment load reaching the lower Mississippi has fallen 80% since 1850. 6 large dams upstream trap another 100 to 150 million additional tons before the water even reaches Louisiana. Michael Blum and Harry Roberts of LSU calculated the consequence in Nature Geoscience. Restoring what Louisiana has lost would require between 18,000 and 24,000 billion tons of sediment, more than the Mississippi can deliver. Every decade of delay adds another billion tons to a deficit that will never be recovered. Their conclusion was one sentence: significant drowning is inevitable. The football field of land lost every 100 minutes is not a rounding error. Louisiana has been measuring the losses since 1932, and the numbers track in one direction. In the 1970s, the rate hit 32 square miles per year. Between 1985 and 2010, it averaged 16.57 square miles annually. Between 2010 and 2016, updated USGS satellite data showed some slowing to roughly 9.7 square miles per year, about one football field every 100 minutes. Brady Cuvillian, the USGS geographer who calculated the football field figure, was careful about what it means. There are many hours with no change at all, he said. And then there are hours, during a hurricane, where hundreds of football fields are lost in a single hour. The average is real. The trend is real. And the 2,006 square miles already gone since 1932 do not come back. Louisiana's oil and gas industry accelerated the loss from inside. Since the 1930s, energy companies have carved more than 10,000 miles of canals through the coastal wetlands to access drilling sites and lay pipelines. These canals act as highways for saltwater, killing the marsh vegetation that holds the wetland together and accelerating erosion from the interior outward. The Minerals Management Service concluded in 1987 that canal development caused between 30 and 60% of all wetland losses between 1,955 and 1,978. The oil industry's own study, released in 1989, acknowledged that canal effects tend to be the overwhelming cause of wetland losses in the affected areas. Here is the part that should stop you cold. A March 2026 investigation by the Lens and DeSmog uncovered internal industry documents showing that oil companies knew about this destruction almost a century ago. A 1,932 memo from Prairie Oil and Gas Company reads, "It is only a matter of time until opposition will force us to dispose of our residue in a non-objectionable manner. We cannot escape the moral responsibility." A 1,970 internal memo from Humble Oil, later ExxonMobil, titled, "What to Do When You Are Cited," instructed employees, "Do not admit fault personally or on behalf of the company." The moral responsibility was identified in 1932. The coast kept disappearing for another 90 years. In April 2025, a jury in Plaquemines Parish delivered the first verdict from the 42 pending lawsuits. Chevron must pay $744 million for wetland destruction at the Bayou Gentilly oil field. The case is now before the Supreme Court. The Trump administration filed a brief supporting Chevron. The decision will determine the fate of dozens of additional cases valued collectively in the billions. It will also determine whether the industry that built Louisiana's economy and helped destroy Louisiana's coast will ever be held financially accountable for the difference. The 29th of August, 2005. Hurricane Katrina makes landfall as a Category 3 storm near Burris, Louisiana, weaker than the system the levees were designed to withstand. The levees fail anyway, not by being overtopped, by being structurally defective. The Army Corps of Engineers had driven steel sheet piles only 17 feet into the ground in some locations, when the soil conditions required 60 or more. Sand was used where clay was needed. The system was only 60 to 90% complete after 4 decades of construction. More than 50 breaches opened across the city. 80% of New Orleans flooded. 1,833 people died. 125,000 homes were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Economic damage reached $125 billion. More than 1 million people were displaced from the Gulf Coast region. The American Society of Civil Engineers called it the worst engineering catastrophe in United States history. The failure was not a natural disaster. It was a man-made one. Ivor Van Heerden was the deputy director of LSU's Hurricane Center. He ran the computer models that explained exactly how the levees failed not from the storm surge, but from design defects the Corps had known about for years. He testified before Congress. He wrote a book. He told anyone who would listen that the system had failed because of negligence, not nature. In 2009, LSU fired him. His research contract was not renewed. The university received millions in federal contracts from the Army Corps of Engineers. Van Heerden's colleagues told reporters they were warned not to associate with him. "We have been warning about this since 1992, he said years later, in a voice stripped of surprise. "What bothers me most is all the people who died unnecessarily." The recovery exposed a different kind of failure. In January 2006, a city planning commission published a map studded with large green dots over New Orleans' lowest-lying neighborhoods, all of them predominantly black. Green meant parks, open space, no rebuilding. The lower 9th Ward, New Orleans East, Gentilly, Broadmoor, marked for planned erasure. Residents called it an ethnic cleansing blueprint drawn up in a conference room. The formal plan collapsed under mass protest. The demographic outcome happened anyway. New Orleans today has 130,000 fewer residents than before Katrina. Roughly 100,000 of them are black. The federal Road Home Rebuilding Program paid grants based on pre-storm market value, not reconstruction costs, and because decades of redlining had systematically depressed property values in black neighborhoods, black homeowners received an average of $18,000 less than what rebuilding actually required. Total shortfall, $349 million. The false recovery came in stages, and it was real enough to believe. The federal government committed more than $140 billion to Gulf Coast recovery, more, inflation adjusted, than the Marshall Plan that rebuilt all of post-war Europe. The Army Corps of Engineers designed and constructed the hurricane and storm damage risk reduction system, 350 miles of levees and floodwalls, 73 pump stations, the largest storm surge barrier on Earth, a concrete gate weighing 675 tons per leaf, completed in stages and declared fully operational in June 2022. Engineers called it a masterpiece. The Risk Reduction Authority announced it could withstand a 100-year storm event. Residents started buying houses again. New restaurants opened in the French Quarter. People allowed themselves, for just a moment, to believe the problem had been solved. Then the June 2025 Tulane study landed, and the masterpiece had a hidden flaw. The study, led by Simone Fiaschi using 20 years of satellite radar data, mapped the vertical movement of every section of the new flood defense system. The findings were precise and devastating. Some sections of the new concrete flood walls were sinking at 28 millimeters per year, 7 times faster than sea level is rising. The projected elevation loss across the entire system by 2078 is between 1 3/4 and 2 feet. The system was designed to last until 2057. The Army Corps of Engineers estimates it will need $3.5 billion in additional maintenance over 50 years just to hold the current level of protection in a city with a $222 million budget deficit and a credit rating 2 steps above junk. The neighborhoods tell the story more concretely than any satellite. Eastover sits between 10 and 14 feet below sea level, the lowest inhabited neighborhood in the city. Lakeview and Gentilly, which flooded most catastrophically in Katrina, sit 6 to 8 feet below. The drainage canal beds reach 18 to 20 feet below sea level. The French Quarter, built on the natural river levee where the French first placed their colony in 1718, sits at 10 feet above. The city's own airport is 4.5 feet above sea level, higher than most of the residential neighborhoods it serves. And all that water under all those neighborhoods is being pumped upward, against gravity, every hour of every day, by steam turbines installed when Woodrow Wilson was president. Turbine 4, installed in 1915, has received $43 million in repairs and failed 11 times in 2022 alone. Turbine 5 exploded in December 2019, injuring 3 workers. In the first 3 months of 2026, New Orleans experienced 5 major water main breaks, 1 sewer rupture, and 4 boil water advisories. The Sewerage and Water Board released a $2 billion infrastructure action plan in March 2026 to replace 60% of the pipes, many more than a century old in a city that cannot afford to build the things that would stop the land from disappearing in the first place. Here is the number that keeps coastal engineers awake at night. The football field of land lost every 100 minutes creates a measurable, compounding vulnerability. Every mile of wetland that disappears removes half a foot of hurricane storm surge protection. Louisiana has lost more than 2,000 square miles since 1932. That is not a metaphor. That is the distance between New Orleans and the open Gulf, shrinking. When Katrina formed in 2005, the storm crossed more than 60 miles of wetland before reaching the city. In the current projections, by 2070, portions of that buffer could be reduced to open water. The people who feel the land disappearing most concretely are not in New Orleans. They are in the communities the city rarely mentions. Isle de Jean Charles is a narrow strip of land at the end of a two-lane road in Terrebonne Parish, home to the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe, pushed into the bayous by colonization in the 19th century, excluded from Louisiana public schools until 1952, and for generations largely invisible to the state that was destroying their land. The island covered 22,000 acres when the tribe arrived. Today, it covers 320, a loss of 98%. The church is gone. The only store is gone. The road floods with the tides. In 2016, the federal government granted $48.3 million for the first federally funded climate relocation in American history. By 2025, 37 families had moved to New Isle, a resettlement community 40 miles inland. The project, reported Inside Climate News in September 2025, had become a cautionary tale, not a model. Houses with leaking doors, appliances failing, tax and insurance costs residents never faced on the island, and less than $1.4 million remaining from the original $48 million. And here is the detail that makes the whole story collapse into itself. Climate Central's flood projection maps show that New Isle, the community built specifically to escape rising water, sits in an area that could itself be surrounded by water under projected sea level scenarios by 2100. The first climate relocation in American history may have moved people from one sinking island to another. The Isle de Jean Charles resettlement was supposed to show the nation how to save a community from disappearing ground. What it showed instead is that there may not be enough solid ground left to move to. 80 miles away, Charles Robin runs a shrimping boat out of what used to be Shell Beach, a community of Canary Islander descendants that once held 300 families. 4 original families remain. I make less as a boat captain now than I made as a deckhand back then, he said. The bayous where his family fished for generations are now open water. The land did not erode, it did not wash away. It sank, then flooded, and never came back up. In Leeville, 3 neon signs mark the point where the old highway disappears into the water. A GPS instrument installed next to a bait shop in 1991 recorded more than a foot of land loss against the sea in 2 decades. The highway itself had to be elevated onto 22-foot pilings. And then there are the cemeteries. New Orleans buries its dead above ground, the famous cities of the dead, because early French settlers discovered that coffins floated when rain saturated the soil. The coastal communities never had that option. During Hurricane Katrina, almost 1,000 coffins escaped their burial sites and had to be recovered across the flooded landscape. During Ida in 2021, dozens of caskets were carried off in Jean Lafitte. Norman Buis walked through black water, searching for the coffin of his infant brother. It's hard. It hurts to see something like that. The state's forensic office eventually developed a mobile app to track displaced coffins by barcode. Near Leeville, the cemetery founded during a yellow fever epidemic in 1905 is now completely underwater, accessible only by boat. Its headstones barely visible above the surface, shrimp boats passing overhead. Wendell Carroll has lived near that cemetery his entire life. "We didn't bury people in swamps," he said. "We buried them on high ground." This was high ground. The math of saving Louisiana does not close. The 2023 Coastal Master Plan proposes 77 projects over 50 years at a total cost of $50 billion. If fully implemented, It would reduce annual storm damage costs from a projected $24.3 billion to roughly $15 billion. The problem is the money. 80% of the master plan's funding comes from the BP Deepwater Horizon settlement, a finite pool draining towards zero around 2032. After that date, the annual coastal restoration budget falls from approximately $1 billion to roughly $200 million, which is insufficient to maintain the projects already built, let alone complete the ones on paper. Michelle Gonzalez, a coastal planner from Jefferson Parish, described the approaching moment without softening it. We will reach that cliff. The Mid-Barataria sediment diversion was the engineering answer to the sediment math. A 2-mile channel capable of moving 75,000 cubic feet of Mississippi River water and sediment per second into the Barataria Basin, the most heavily degraded coastal area in Louisiana. Over 30 years, models projected it would reconstruct between 17,000 and 26,000 acres of wetland. 55 scientists with a combined 1,300 years of coastal research experience signed a letter of support. The Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority itself wrote in 2012 that sustainable restoration of our coast without sediment diversions is not possible. The project broke ground in August 2023. $619 million was spent. Then Governor Jeff Landry ordered a 90-day pause in April 2025. The Corps of Engineers suspended the federal permit. Louisiana officially terminated the project on the 17th of July 2025. Gordon Dove, CPRA chairman under Landry, declared, "It doesn't make economic sense." The oyster fishing industry, whose beds would have been temporarily disrupted by the freshwater inflow, had lobbied hard against it. Scientists who had spent careers building the case for the diversion described the cancellation as the coastal equivalent of pulling the one functioning organ out of a patient in organ failure. What the cancellation means in practical terms: replacing through dredging what the diversion would have built naturally would cost $6 billion. Dredged projects cannot reproduce themselves. They require constant maintenance and eventually fail. A functioning sediment diversion, fed by the river, builds land indefinitely. Louisiana chose the $200 million bait shop over the $2.9 billion fishing industry. The consequences extend far beyond Louisiana's borders, in ways that most Americans have never been asked to calculate. The Port of New Orleans handles $100 billion in cargo annually. Louisiana produces 19% of the nation's domestic oil output and a disproportionate share of America's refining capacity. More than $100 billion in energy infrastructure pipelines, refineries, platforms, storage facilities sits in the coastal flood zone. A major hurricane that overwhelms the flood defense system does not just flood a city, it shuts down a critical node of the American economy. In 2005, Katrina and Rita together took 25% of U.S. oil refining capacity offline. What a storm of equivalent or greater force does to a coast that has lost another 100 square miles of natural buffer since then is not a hypothetical. It is a projection with a specific number attached. The levees are real, the pumps are running. The city still stands, and the music still plays in the French Quarter on Saturday nights, and the food is still extraordinary, and 350,000 people still call it home. That is not nothing. The $15.6 billion flood system did not fail when Ida tested it in 2021. The engineering holds on most days. The science on display in New Orleans is, on its face, a remarkable demonstration of what human determination can accomplish in the face of an unfavorable geology. But a football field of land disappears into the Gulf of Mexico every 100 minutes. The walls protecting the city are sinking faster than the sea is rising. The BP money that funds every meaningful restoration project runs out by 2032. The one engineering project that scientists agreed could actually reverse the trajectory, the Mid-Barataria diversion, funded, permitted, and under construction was canceled after $619 million was spent because the political will to finish it did not survive an election. And the sediment deficit grows by more than 1 billion tons with each passing decade. A geological debt compounding in the dark beneath the water. Ivor Van Heerden was fired from LSU for telling the truth about what failed in 2005. He said it again recently, and the answer was no different. "We can build levees forever," he said, "but the land underneath them will keep sinking, and one day, the levees will not be enough." The question is not whether that day comes. The question is whether anyone in a position to change the outcome will act before it does. The land disappears at a football field every 100 minutes. The clock is not a metaphor, it is a countdown.